Welcome to the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad Photograph Preservation and Digitization Project. It's really a straightforward project. Railroad photographers took photographs. Those photographs were negatives, and the negatives were developed, and then they produced, on some occasions, a print of that photograph. It's the PNRR, Reading Railroad Photograph Archive, the John M. Lawler Sr. Collection. That's my dad, who uh, who salvaged these photographs and gave them to me in 1990. More on that later on. You can see from this photograph that the Reading Railroad was a hub in the center of town in Reading. Well, let's go back in time and take a look at some of the Reading's history and some family history and the history of these photographs. You find the brief history of the Reading system written by J.V. Hare, Secretary and Treasurer, in a book entitled The Century of Reading Company Motive Power. The full citation is here. You can see the work was written in 1941, and the emphasis is technical in this book, that is, the type of locomotive and its features. In the brief history, we find that on April 4th, 1833, the Reading Company was named executor of the charter to create the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, later changed to railroad. You'll note that as we go through this presentation, the railroad changes its name several times in its lifespan. When did it open? Well, it opened in segments and seemed to keep adding more segments as time went on of line to the road. We know that it opened in 1842 to Port Clinton, so you could ride from Philly to Port Clinton in 1842. There was a railroad in Port Clinton, the Little Schuylkill and Northern Railroad, and that railroad completed the trip to Pottsville. Eventually, of course, it would be uh, consumed by the Reading Railroad. In 1893, the railroad ran afoul of fair practices laws and was reorganized and had a name change from Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, PNRR, to Philadelphia and Reading Railway, PNRR. So it went from PNRR to PNRR. Again, in 1923, it was accused of monopoly, and there was an anti-monopoly judgment against the railroad, having to divest itself of its coal mining holdings, and it changed its name again, this time to Reading Railroad. The Reading Railroad is famous to most people for its presence on the board game Monopoly. You can get the railroad for a mortgage value of $100. You'll notice April Fool's Day, 1976, Reading Railroad faded away. It disappeared with six other eastern railroads, creating the Consolidated Rail Corporation. Now, that was Conrail, also known as Conrail. But I don't know which of these two came first. Whether I think it was the lowercase r, but I could be wrong on that. So from April 4th, 1833 to April 1st, 1976, there's lots of railroad history to uncover. The Rocket, a famous locomotive, was in service on the Reading until 1879. So that's 41 years it worked and got over 310,000 miles. Rather impressive. One of Reading's first locomotives, it was dropped off at the Schuylkill Canal at the foot of Front and Penn Streets in Reading. Front and Penn Streets becomes rather important in railroad history. It was a interchange between the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Reading, but it's also very much present in family history. After it retired, it went on tour. 1893, it was in Chicago for the Columbian Exposition. 1904, it was at St. Louis, and in 1927, it was at the Fair of the Iron Horse. Uh, that was in the suburban Baltimore area, in honor of the Baltimore and Ohio charter anniversary. first scheduled run out of Reading was on May 1st, 1838. The engine never sink, Baldwin Locomotive Works engine out of built in Philadelphia, was the engine that day. Um, Reading to Philadelphia service started on December 5th, 1839. The engine that day was the Gowan and Marks, shown here in a drawing from the collection. The first trip out of Reading was recorded for us. It is stated in a report of the engineers to the Board of Managers that the company's engine, the Gowan and Marks, on that day, December 5th, 1839, left Reading with a train of 80 cars, conveying 1,635 barrels of flour, 73 and a quarter tons of blooms, 6 tons of coal, 2 hogsheads of whiskey, and other articles, and 60 persons. And that's not the full story, however. Between Reading and Pottstown, one of the water pipes of the Gowan and Marks failed, and the Delaware and Neversink had to rescue it. After a run of 9 hours, the train reached Philadelphia, where it received a great ovation. I'm not sure how many people were waiting for it after 9 hours. Family and personal railroad history. Well, there was a train yard when I was about 5. Had a nice set of trains in it, including this one Lionel freight train. Sometimes I'd walk to work with my dad, and we'd see steam engines and tenders parked out the south end of the locomotive shop. There were certainly family holidays, rail rambles. The railroad rented Hershey Park for a day, and we took an excursion there every summer. And the Reading Company YMCA held safety rallies, which were really more like variety shows. Best of the travels that we had on the railroad were at Christmas time. You go down to Philadelphia, have lunch at Horn and Hordart, the automat there. For some change, you'd get a really nice meal. Then, like many people, you'd meet up at the Eagle in Wanamaker's, in a very prominent location, and attend their Christmas show. I have a few seconds of it here for you. I managed to find a locomotive and a passenger car in the video, so we have that highlighted here. And following an afternoon of shopping, we would wind up at St. Peter and Paul's Basilica in Philadelphia for an evening mass service. Take the train home. But we do have a change in the tradition to Santa trains. Here's my wife, Shelley.
Stop to investigate.
Do you see him?
Here's my daughter-in-law, Amy, and my granddaughter, Josie. There's Santa. We're a little shy. That's better. We're warming up. So the Santa train had become something of a tradition for us. We also have a train yard in the basement. That's my grandson Maverick there, who's enjoying changing the location of the buildings and changing the order of the cars and, just playing on the railroad. A little closer view of the guy. He's now in his 20s and looks very little like that anymore. And the family went to New Freedom, Hanover, Pennsylvania, to take a ride on what I believe these letters mean is the Northern Central Railroad. Their locomotive was at the time, the most recent manufactured steam engine in the country. Uh, we also like to go to museums, and here we have Maverick hanging out the window of the 2846 at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. My other grandson, Matthias, is shown here at the Reading Railroad Heritage Museum in Hamburg, a really nice place to visit. Then there are successor railroads. This is the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern Railroad. My family, daughter and son-in-law and grandson, Matthias, took a train ride on here. Here they are. That's Alicia, Jeff, Matthias, now a high school student, and his buddy Gabe took a fall excursion ride just this past fall on this Blue Northern successor. It's quite extensive, really. If you take a look at their map, runs from Reading all the way up to the New York line. You can get freight. There's passenger service certainly up to Jim Thorpe. There's a nice excursion ride out of Jim Thorpe. It's right here in Carbon County. My family's been working on the railroad. On my mother's side, the Townsend side, my great grandfather James worked for the Pennsylvania and Reading Railroad at the car shop at St. Clair. He was mortally injured while hopping on an engine to get home to Palo Alto, and that was in 1916. On my dad's side, including him, we have a great grandfather, Patrick, the second great grandfather who worked for the railroad. P&R Brakeman worked out of New Philadelphia or out of Schuylkill Haven. I'm not sure which. He was mortally injured in an accident at Mine Hill Crossing just north of Schuylkill Haven in 1892. My grandfathers worked on the railroad. One worked for the PNRR and one worked for the Pennsylvania. This is a drawing from the collection showing the engine Pennsylvania owned by the PNRR. And I put him in Reading colors, so Andrew Lawler, and on my mother's side, Robert Townsend in the Pensy colors, and that's all ready to go. Oh, on my mother's side, I also had an uncle. My Uncle Ed worked in the Reading paint shop. Not for very long. He only worked for one day, and he totally hated it. On my dad's side, including him, we have Uncle Paul. He was general foreman in Reading, and my Uncle Bill, clerical in the motive power and rolling equipment department of the. And of course, I've been working on the railroad. Here's a family sing-along version. I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morning. Can't you hear the captain shouting? Trying to blow your horn. Well, I too worked at Front and Penn Streets in Reading, where that first engine came through and where my grandfather worked. And I also worked in the locomotive shop, and that's where my other grandfather was a machinist for a short while in about 1920. All of us at one time or another worked near the Roundhouse in Reading or at Front and Penn, and I've wondered if one of them is on a collection of photographs. Creating the collection. Photographers photographs of locomotives after they left the shop, be at the north end of the shop, most of them are, or sometimes with the coal dock in the background, uh, shoot them there. So there's a lot of photographs from right in this area in the center of this photograph, which was this is actually a postcard from the Power Library of Pennsylvania. Wonderful visual items there. Another one of their postcards showing the same area but from a different perspective. No Finer Shop in the Country ran a 1902 newspaper article in the Reading Eagle than the Reading Company's new locomotive plant, putting in some of the machinery. The interior of the Reading Company's new machine shop is rapidly nearing completion. A large force of men is employed putting up the hangers for the shafting and electric wires. The floor is now being laid and is partially completed. This would provide employment opportunities for initially for hundreds of workers, eventually for thousands in the Reading shops. Aerial photograph that shows the shop area of Reading. Locomotive shop is located right here. Nearby is the roundhouse that's down here with its turntable and car shops. This is the coal dock here. And for quite a while on the railroad, I worked in an area right in here where they had a little building called the inspection pit, also known as the roundhouse, although it wasn't a roundhouse. So to create the collection, we found that most of the photographers worked for the superintendent of the motive power and rolling equipment. Some were employees of the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia because many of the photographs were taken outside of their manufacturing facility. We don't know who the photographers were, but they left us a silhouette of themselves in the shadow at the bottom of the screen. You can see the photographer, camera's on a tripod here, and he's pulling the shutter cord. So they worked for the superintendent motive power. The lab was located at 6th and Perry Streets in Reading. There was probably another lab in Philadelphia, but I've not been able to confirm that. So they snapped pictures of new, refurbished, and specialty equipment, and they did that either for reference purposes, so that they would have a photograph available of the item, or for publication purposes. The bad news is that in publication, they did a lot of cropping, and that cropping uh, kind of ruined those photographs for further use. Well, we find in April 1st of 1976, the railroad shop was closed when Conrail came into existence. They sent people up who were to convert the Reading into Conrail. One of the things that these employees did was they trashed the photographic lab. My dad became a dumpster diver that day. Now this is just a reenactment over here on the right hand side because my dad never wore sneakers and he never wore blue jeans either. So this is a total fabrication. However, it does get the point across that he salvaged these photographs. Pretty large collection. It's over 400 items. They were all scattered around in a box. Many of them, however, were in envelopes like these, but some that they didn't match what was in them. They really, I guess he tried to put it together, back together as best he could, and then in about 1990, he handed these over to me. Now, some in the collection already had a print like this, but most of them had just the negative, a 5 by 7 negative that was either film or glass. There were also diagrams, prints, drawings, and other documents in the collection. This one is a diagram for a locomotive, and this is the locomotive it's a diagram for. These diagrams are very useful. They're drawn to obviously to scale, and that is really good for a hobbyist who would make models. This is my train model from when I was a kid. Well, the steps that I took, the first step was to sort the envelopes by number and get an inventory of them based upon the number of the envelope, and try to ascertain exactly what was inside the envelope. Sometimes you could, sometimes you couldn't, because some of the negatives were very, very tough to read. Then I created a database that looks like this. As I went along collecting the information, you can see envelope numbers over here, engines here, and so forth. Then I had the print scanned at high resolution. Now I scanned all of the prints, uh, except for one or two that I took to a professional photographer. Whereas where I had to take the negatives went out to uh, Northlight Photography. We scanned both the film and the glass. In some cases where there was broken glass, we did some repairs to the digital copy, but not to the original. Created a print copy. I went to either Shutterfly Online or CVS for one 4x6 photograph of each locomotive, and I put that in an envelope along with the negative in an acid-free, lignin-free envelope. I sorted the envelopes by type, that would be by steam or diesel, and by number. And stored those envelopes in clear plastic storage boxes. They're really dust proof, and put them in a cool location. Uh, the film is very sensitive to heat, so you have to be careful with that. And I have them in an area that there's no sunlight. Oh, they should be preserved pretty well from now on. So the process was straightforward like this. Here's the big collection. We converted either the prints or the negatives in a scanner, output digital copies of the item, put that in the database. If there was a print, that went one way. If there was no print for the digital, we made a print. If there was a print and a negative available in the envelope, then all we did was repackage that into one of these envelopes and store those for safety, for stability, really. And for the digital ones, I set up a Facebook page for the group and posted well over 200 photographs there. Now, this is the dimensions of the collection. There are about 415. There could still be a few more than that because I haven't gone through all the broken glass yet, and haven't gone through all the rolling stock boxcars, cabooses, that sort of thing, to see what this final number will be. It might go up by 5 or so. Anyway, there's 282 total locomotives. Of those, 212 are steam, 65 diesel. The 5 miscellaneous are self-propelled inspection cars that the railroad owned, mostly for use by executives to go around and attend certain events on the railroad or check for track problems, get to crash scenes, that kind of thing. Of the steam locomotives, 32 of them are named, like the Rocket or the Gowan and Marks locomotives or the Neversink. In 1871, they began numbering the locomotives. Now, within this group, this larger group of miscellaneous, the ones that stick out are the Crusader engine, a 118. There are shop negatives of that being converted from just the standard locomotive, although a really impressive Pacific locomotive, into the Crusader Streamline engine. There's also photographs of the car interior. You'll see those later on in the video. And there were 4 tugboats. They have an interesting record of their own, and you'll see some of these scenes in the Reading Yard. You already saw the aerial view of Reading, and we'll have pictures of a crane, things like that. Not all of the images were the best quality. This is a nice looking photograph. However, you'll see this markings up here. in this emulsion. Uh, this is, from what I've learned, is from a poor distribution of the emulsion in the development process. There's also, you can't really see them in this photograph. I can see them because I know they're there. There are some uh, spots on this negative in here that could be cleaned up. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these guys, so there's nothing to fix with them. However, up here you can see there's this problem, and we can fix that. And here it is fixed up. So we got rid of the worst of the emulsion problems over here, managed to clear them up. And when it comes to these guys, you can see that that now has disappeared, and the photograph is in pretty good shape. This photograph was a little trickier to fix. It was obviously a broken glass. What Jim Freeman did was he scanned these in, and then I did the restoration from there. And that's what it looks like now once it's been edited. This photograph had a broken off corner. We don't even know what it was. But this one was done, but this digital copy was fixed by Jim Freeman at Northern Light. And what he did was he estimated that this pole would continue to go down, and of course it would, and that this kind of vegetation and this kind of surface was adjacent to that. And so this is what he drew that added to the image. Nothing was done to the original. It's still a broken picture. But this photograph is really a nice one with the background that it has and the foreground. It's a very interesting.
I created a group on Facebook, the Reading and P&R Railroad Chief Mechanical Office locomotive photographs, a mouthful. I started posting in there in November of 2023, and I'm just about completed with entry of images up there. Almost all of what I would call the really good ones are been scanned and posted. The priority posts include certainly locomotives with crews, and then there's the locomotives with background. Many of the photographs are rather sterile. It's just a locomotive, and almost none of the diesels have any crews at all associated with them. Next would be landmarks, like train stations and colliers and things with interesting materials behind the image. Then I posted documents, and you've already seen some documents. These include newspaper clippings and the diagrams and travel guides, the menu for the Crusader, and some of the favorites that I have include like this. This is actually two photographs of the 1434. You can see that crew's not photoshopped in there, or the good, and that's why these images are so powerful. They show us a little bit about who was working on the road at that time, and he does bear something of a family relationship. Look, another good one with crews. Sometimes when you take a look at these photographs, you say, "Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I wonder who this guy is." And the facial recognition from him to my grandfather was fairly high. So I don't know. We may have found the guy. Then of course there's something like this. This is the Kosciuszko, and that's just fun to say. Plus it's neat. There's that urban scape or city behind it there. It's kind of cool. And of course another nice background shot. And you get some that are cityscapes or trainscapes, pictures of the yard or of the Mount Penn in Reading. That would be early 20th century that this photograph was taken. You can see the two roundhouses
In addition to all the stills that I just went through, the collection has a series of photographs dealing with the Reading Railroad's Art Deco train, the Crusader. These Art Deco trains were all the rage in the 1930s, late 30s, and 1940s. So it's sort of Art Deco streamliners, 1930s railroading as an art form. And on the left, you see the Pennsylvania Railroad's 3768 and the Union Pacific's number 2906. These engines and the trains all had names. Art Deco trains were popularized in Agatha Christie's Perot as you look at the entry screens for that show. It was so aces, you'll blow your wig. Now, those are terms from the 1930s. I had to look those up.
All aboard!
I really like the conversion of that locomotive into this streamliner. In addition to all the locomotive photographs you've seen, the collection does have some motive power other than locomotives. For example, there are inspection cars and the Holmes crane, and here are tugboats. It will go through each one of these in turn. They all have stories to them. This is the Black Diamond. It's an inspection car. It's used by management. These were self-propelled, so they count as motive power. Used to get to derailment scenes, to new functions, special functions or events on the railroad. They would take this, and they were used for inspection of the line, make sure the track is in order. And there's the Holmes crane. This Holmes crane was just received by the Reading Railroad. Uh, the date I have on the photograph, this is one of the few that has documentation on the back of it, tell you what's what. You can see it's still in its packing skids, being received by this gentleman, who is none other than the famed dumpster diver who rescued the collection. You don't normally think of sailing when you consider railroads, but there was a fleet of tugboats. The Tammaq was shown here, that plied the waters in of the United States northeast coast. You can see where they did their work. This is a photograph by William Henry Jackson, the famous photographer of the 19th, 20th century. A view from the PNRR railway station, 1892. All the activity that's going on in this harbor area of New York. The tugboats went from Port Reading in New Jersey up to New England, up to Boston, making stops along the way. And they hauled primarily coal barges, sometimes taking two, three, four at a time. So this is the area of activity. It's shown here on this 1917 ICC railroad map. The ICC required the railroads to do evaluation of everything they owned. I mean everything. On one of the occasions, the tugboat Patience uh, became a real hero in this drama that was unfolding off of the Manhattan Bridge in near the Battery. You can see where the Manhattan Bridge is. It's just upstream from the Brooklyn Bridge. 154 rescued, 4 missing in the river crash. That's the headline in the Daily News of the New York Daily News on Thursday, January 3rd, 1935. A really surreal event. If you take two of the newspapers from the period, one in North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota, and another in New York City, they have very similar reporting, but there are some interesting differences. This would have made a really, really good lesson for class when you have those just a few minutes that you want to think something over and sort of brainstorm ideas. This is perfect for that. Both uh, uh, narrate that the orchestra stayed and played while the ship was sinking. It says here, knee deep in water that swirled over the main lounge, the ship's orchestra blared Somebody stole my gal, while 9 Negro stewards stuck to the vessel to help the last passengers onto the tugs. The Daily News reported officers and men of the Lexington worked with perfect discipline in clearing the boat, which sank 10 minutes after the collision. The ship's orchestra struck up a jazz time offering of Linger a While and remained at its post until summoned by the skipper. In this case, there are 9 stewards. In this reporting, a paragraph or two before, reported that there were four cooks that stayed and helped passengers. See there. But the biggest thing is that we see out of these two paragraphs is the question of what song did they sing? Yeah, that's right. I found them, and they're available. Uh, the Somebody Stole My Gal, a Leo Wood written song, 1918, played by Benny Goodman. If you're listening to this video, you can fast forward if you don't want to hear the songs because I'm going to play them.
Somebody stole my gal. Somebody stole my pal. Somebody came and took her away. She didn't even say she was leaving the kiss that I love so. He's getting now, I know. And I know that she would come to me if she could see a broken-hearted, lonesome pal. Somebody stole my girl.
Sure. Oh, that there you are, knee deep in water that's swirled over the main lounge, and you're playing the song "Somebody Stole My Gal." Just insane. On the other hand, when you take a look at this story, you're on a sinking ship, and the band is playing "Linger a While," which is just the opposite of what you're trying to do. It's get the heck out of there. So I just found this to be amazing. And if you lay the two newspaper articles out completely, you can detect all these little differences. They're not very meaningful like this is. And you can come to some conclusions on why there's a difference. Uh, it took 10 minutes to sync. You can play more than one song in 10 minutes, so it's conceivable that they played both of these songs. Or depending upon the distance someone was from the ship, Linger a While might have sounded like Somebody Stole My Gal. I don't know. They're not that similar, but they are from sort of the same type of 1920s era jazz form. 154 saved, 4 were missing. Musicians played on. Here's the Patience. The tug Patience followed astern the Lexington, threw over a rickety gangplank to the tilting deck of the Lexington, and took aboard 93 persons. The tug Diamond S rescued 12, the John Rube 47, and the Elmira rescued 4. It seems like some of the folks got onto the Patience, and then they were transferred from the Patience to one of these other ships. The other ships couldn't get a gangplank in place. Here's the Patience. It's part of a collection of 4 that are in there. There's 2 for the Tamaqua, and one each for the Schuylkill, Brandywine, and Patience. I found out that there was about 21 at one point that they owned, so that's quite a fleet. Um, Ownership seems to be fairly dynamic. You can find that the Tug Patience is owned by the Reading Railroad in this photograph, but in other cases you find that it might be owned by a different company. And the final point on this is that the Tug went on to other rescues. Tug rescues fishermen, three men from Atlantic City went adrift in a disabled motorboat. And it's pretty frequent that they pull somebody off a sandbar or help after a collision. There's an expression that all good things must end, and so it was with the Reading Railroad. The Reading Eagle reported on March 16th, 1969, that the last passenger train had left the outer station in Reading. Elegant railroad era ends as the last train leaves the outer station. And it was only 31 years since the Reading built the Crusader, and in another 7 years, the whole Reading Railroad ceased to be.
I woke up this morning, had a freight train on my mind. Now that just means I'm gonna ease on down the line. 'Cause I believe in working, but I don't find time. I've got the railroad blues, but I haven't got no railroad fare. Ain't got nowhere to go, nowhere to go. Nobody waiting for me there. I'll get an arm full of freight trains as sure as I'm born. Ride so far you think I'm dead and gone. Got the railroad blues, but I haven't got no railroad fare.
So at this point, the collection is pretty well under control. I managed to transfer all the negatives and prints to these safe envelopes. They're put in a sort of a sealed plastic container and then kept in a dark environment so no sunlight or anything else will get through to cause them to deteriorate. And we have the formats here. You have a database linked to images that are on it, and then we made a couple of things up, Shutterfly and others, uh, to sort of enliven the project a little bit. There are other ways to map railroad memory. I mean, the collection is one fine way, but there's lots of other resources that are out there, and some far better. There's print, visual, film, exhibits, and records. You can go to museums like I did with my grandsons. Libraries and archives. They have the records of the railroad. You can go to the successor railroads. We saw one of those, the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern. And there's historical societies where presentations are made, articles are written for their journals, and they have the stores of historical data for the community. Really important to take a look at the holdings of historical societies for any kind of project like this that has a strong local lean to it. You can go to the newspapers too. A lot of clippings. ENRR number 3. It reads, I'll just read a little bit of it, just the first 2 sentences. The Reading Company yards are the mecca of many visitors. The company has placed a wonderful display. Old number 3 engine has been repainted and is attracting the most attention. Then it goes on to explain the locomotive and some of its features, and tells you that it regularly served on the People's Railway and ran regularly between Pottsville and Minersville. It was known as the Whippoorwill. So it's active in service until 1883. And so now you've started to layer some stories in with these equipment, and they're no longer just sterile images, but they're images that have some meaning to them. Kids are still, I think, looking forward to being the engineer on a locomotive like the 117 and like this young man is. And that's nice to have those opportunities still alive today. And we have a debt of gratitude to whomever this man is who took all these photographs and packaged them up so well and passed them along only to have the collection disrupted by Conrail. Well, it's back in order again, and we have a nice ending screen with a real nice picture of crew and shop workers on the 1700. Reminds me of all the people I worked with over that, about 14-year span, 11 years of service. That's just a few of them. There's more. And each one of these is a story, and I have a story about each one of these too. And I'm sure they have stories about me that would be interesting to hear, perhaps. But now we can see that we can help keep this material from fading away. We can retrieve it and restore it and put it in a stable environment. I thank you very much. It's not the end, but it does help to slow these fading memories. So thank you. I'm John J.M. Lawler at Comcast.net.